Today we're going to go over the chapters 14 through 16 case studies. We're going to start with stroke. This is on Beth, an 85-year-old female who suffered a stroke that affected part of her cerebral cortex. The left-hand side of Beth's body was paralyzed with the exception of her left leg and foot. She also lost all sensation on the left side of her body with the exception of her left leg and foot. So we'll start with question number 1. It says, where is the precentral gyrus and what is its function? So if we remember the brain, and we had this main sulcus here, which is called the central sulcus. We know that the precentral gyrus is right in front of that. So here's the precentral gyrus. So it's right at the posterior border of the frontal lobe, right in front of that central sulcus. The function of that precentral gyrus is that it forms the primary motor cortex, or the primary motor area, which will innervate all the voluntary muscles of the body. Number 2, where's the postcentral gyrus and what is its function? The postcentral gyrus is right behind that central sulcus, so it's found at the anterior portion of the parietal lobe, and it's found just posterior to the central sulcus. And what is its function? It forms the primary sensory cortex, or primary sensory area, that receives sensory fibers from the whole body. It's basically receiving all of the general sensations that are coming from the thalamus. Number 3, what are the motor and sensory homunculi? These homunculi are distorted maps. They're topographical mappings of the different parts of the body onto the primary sensory and the primary motor cortexes. So here I have sort of a silly and absolutely not accurate drawing of the homunculi. So this on the precentral gyrus would be the motor homunculus, and it's just showing like the tongue and the face and a foot. It's not correct in any manner, but that's kind of what you would be seeing. It's an imaginary, distorted map of the human body. And then the same thing on the postcentral gyrus, which is the primary somatosensory cortex. You're seeing the same thing where there's a distorted body map of a tongue, a face, and a foot. So any motor commands coming from that primary central sulcus, if that motor command was going to go to the foot, it would come out of this area. And likewise, if you had any sensation on your foot, then that sensory information would end up synapsing on that portion of the primary sensory cortex. Number 4, which side of Beth's brain has suffered a stroke? Explain your answer with reference to the route of travel of the corticospinal and sensory fibers. In Beth's case, the left side of her body has been affected, so that means that it's the right side of Beth's brain that has suffered the stroke, since the right side of the brain controls and receives information, sensory information, from the left side of the body. In explanation, the corticospinal fibers from the right primary motor cortex of the brain will decussate or cross at the pyramids of the brainstem and go to control the left side of the body. Fibers carrying conscious sensation from the left side of the body decussate either on entry to the spinal cord or at the medulla oblongata, and then they travel to the right primary sensory cortex of the brain. Question 5. How is it possible for Beth to retain motor and sensory function in her left leg and foot, yet have a complete loss of motor and sensory function on the remainder of the left side of her body? Beth has suffered a loss of blood supply to the right primary motor cortex and to the primary sensory cortex that control the left side of her body. Remember, both cortexes, or cortices, are mapped out according to the homunculus. The areas supplying the left leg and foot are in a different location to the areas supplying the remainder of the body. The blood supply to the regions supplying the left leg and foot must therefore have been preserved, while the body supply to the remainder of the primary motor and sensory cortexes must have been lost. Question number 6. If Beth also had problems with new memory formation and/or memory loss, which part of her brain might also have been damaged by the stroke? Memory is formed by the hippocampal part of the limbic system, which sits in the temporal lobe. Damage to this area could have caused memory loss and/or the inability to form new memories. Our next case study is on cerebral artery blockage. Dwight, a 56-year-old IT consultant, woke one morning to find that the right side of his face was drooping. He had a sense of falling to the right side and was having trouble swallowing and speaking. No other symptoms were detected at the time of the examination. Tests revealed that Dwight had suffered a blockage of a single artery supplying part of his central nervous system. Question number 7 says damage to which cranial nerve would cause the right side of the face to droop? We know that cranial nerve 7, which is the facial nerve, controls the muscles of facial expression. Damage to the nerve or to the nucleus of the nerve in the brainstem would result in one side of the face drooping. Question number 2. Where in the central nervous system is the motor origin of the nerve in question number 7? The nucleus of the facial nerve is located in the lower pons. Question number 9. Which cranial nerve is concerned with the maintenance of balance? Cranial nerve 8 is the vestibulocochlear nerve, and the vestibular branch of cranial nerve 8 carries the information concerned with balance from the vestibular system. Question number 10. Where is the sensory termination of the nerve named in question number 9? The vestibular nerve terminates at the vestibular nucleus, which is located in the region where the medulla and the pons meet. Question number 11. Which cranial nerve is concerned with the motor parts of speaking and swallowing? The vagus nerve, which is cranial nerve number 10, that's the vagus nerve, that controls the muscles involved in speaking as well as many of the pharyngeal muscles involved in swallowing. Where is the motor origin of the nerve named in question number 11? The motor origin, or the nucleus, of the vagus nerve is located in the medulla oblongata and the pons. Question number 13. Based on Dwight's symptoms and your answers above, which region of his central nervous system has been damaged, and how extensive do you think the damage is? It seems likely that the right side of the lower pons and medulla oblongata have been damaged. The damaged areas seem relatively limited in size, since the other cranial nerves that originate from the pons and the medulla are remaining pretty functional. For example, the hypoglossal nerve, the accessory nerve, and the trigeminal nerve, as well as the abducens nerve, all seem pretty normal, meaning he's not having any trouble with his tongue movement or with shrugging his shoulders or with sensation to his face or clenching his jaw or moving his eyeball. This is actually a condition when the posterior inferior cerebellar artery is blocked. It's a syndrome that's known as the lateral medullary syndrome. With this syndrome, patients can experience a collection of symptoms that vary depending on the extent of the area without blood supply. So they could end up with hypoglossal nerve damage or accessory nerve or trigeminal nerve or abducens nerve damage, in which case the damage would be, of course, much more extensive if they had more of those symptoms from those cranial nerves. So you're not going to get tested on a lateral medullary syndrome, but this is just a way to help you become aware of some conditions that can occur in the areas where the nuclei of these cranial nerves exist. Our last case study for chapters 14 through 16 is on a spinal cord injury. So Bob, a 46-year-old man, was mugged at knife point. His attacker kicked and stabbed him in the neck. The injury cut the left side of Bob's spinal cord at C6. The right half of his spinal cord was unaffected. So number 14, what is a spinal cord tract? A spinal cord tract is a collection of myelinated axons within the spinal cord that share a similar function. For example, the corticospinal tract is involved in voluntary motor control. Question 15. What is the general role of the descending tracts? Descending tracts carry motor information from the brain to the body. Question 16. What is the general role of the ascending tracts or fasciculi? Ascending tracts carry sensory information from the body to the brain. Question 17. What type of information is carried in the left cuneate fasciculus and the left gracile fasciculus? Which side of the body does each fasciculus connect to? The cuneate fasciculus carries information regarding conscious proprioception, touch, and vibration from the upper trunk and limb, and the gracile fasciculus carries information regarding conscious proprioception, touch, and vibration from the lower trunk and lower limb. Remember, I tried to give you that that kind of hint that graceful, a person walks graceful, so gracile sounds like graceful, so that's carrying the information from the lower trunk, from the lower limbs, the legs. Okay, so both fasciculi in the left side of the spinal cord connect to the left side of the body. So if we're talking about the cuneate and the gracile fasciculus on the left side of the body, they are receiving sensory information from the same side of the body. So what the sensation on the left side of the body is going to the left cuneate and gracile fasciculi. Remember, after that, they synapse and cross over in the medial lemniscus tract. Question number 18. What type of information is carried in the left spinothalamic tract? And what side of the body does the tract connect to? There's both an anterior and a lateral spinothalamic tract. The spinothalamic tract together, both of those, carry information regarding pain, temperature, pressure, and non-discriminative touch. The left spinothalamic tract connects to the right side of the body, so it crosses over the spinal cord to the opposite side of the body. Sensory fibers of the tract enter the dorsal root and either decussate or cross immediately or within 2 vertebral levels, and then ascend to the contralateral side of the spinal cord. Question number 19. What type of information is carried in the left corticospinal tract, and what side of the body does the tract connect to? The left corticospinal tract carries voluntary motor control to the body and enables voluntary movement of the body. So in looking at the corticospinal tract, we remember that, first of all, it originates in the primary motor cortex of the precentral gyrus, and then it will decussate or cross over to the opposite side in the brainstem or in the upper levels of the spinal cord. So in the left side of the spinal cord, the left corticospinal tract will affect the left side of the body. Number 20, explain what symptoms and examination findings Bob would have following the injury to his left cuneate, left gracile, left spinothalamic, and left corticospinal tracts. Think about what functionality would be missing and on which side of the body. So let's start and look at the sensory portion, which would be the cuneate, gracile, spinothalamic. Remember, Bob's injury was at C6. So Bob would have lost pain and temperature sensation on the right side of the body below C6. This is because the second order neurons that decussated in the spinal cord at or just above the point of entry of the first order neurons would be preserved on the left-hand side, but they would have been lost on the right side. He would also have lost fine touch, conscious proprioception, and vibration sensations on the left side of his body from C6 downward. These modalities would have been preserved on the right-hand side. As far as motor goes, he would have paralysis of all muscles on the left side of his body from C6 downward. Motor function on the right-hand side would be preserved. Our last case study for chapters 14 through 16 is on acetylcholinesterase inhibition. So we're talking about the autonomic nervous system here. Elise, a 47-year-old female, was out walking in farmland when she accidentally was sprayed with an organophosphate pesticide, and one day later she became ill. She was salivating excessively, had excessive tear fluid running from her eyes, had diarrhea and fecal incontinence, and had frequent urination. The pesticide had inhibited the activity of Elise's acetylcholinesterase enzyme. So question number 21, what does acetylcholine do at a synapse? Acetylcholine is released from the presynaptic cell, and it binds to the postsynaptic cell, which opens up sodium channels so that the postsynaptic cell can depolarize. Question 22. What does acetylcholinesterase do at that nerve synapse? Acetylcholinesterase is the enzyme that breaks down acetylcholine. So it will help to stop the postsynaptic cell from depolarizing. Number 23. What is the general role of the parasympathetic nervous system? In general, the parasympathetic nervous system is your rest and digest nervous system. It will stimulate all the glands in your body to start secreting other than your sweat glands, which is sympathetic, and it will increase the motility of your digestive tract. Question number 24. Which neurotransmitter is used to transmit signals in the parasympathetic nervous system? Acetylcholine is the only neurotransmitter used. It's released at the ganglion between the pre- and the postsynaptic neurons, and it's also released at the effector between the postganglionic neuron and the effector. Number 25. Which cranial nerves carry parasympathetic nerve fibers, and which of these carries 75% of the parasympathetic neurons? So cranial nerves 3, 7, 9, and 10 all carry parasympathetic nerve fibers, and it's cranial nerve 10, which is the vagus nerve, that carries 75% of the parasympathetic neurons. Question 26. Other than cranial nerves, where else do parasympathetic nerves leave the central nervous system? The parasympathetic nervous system is a craniosacral nervous system. So the parasympathetic nerves leave through the cranial nerves, as mentioned, but they also leave through sacral nerves 2 through 4. Question 27. Will parasympathetic activation increase or decrease glandular activity? Parasympathetic activation will increase the activity of all the glands in your body other than sweat glands. Question 28. Which of Elise's symptoms are indications of increased glandular activity? Elise has been salivating excessively, so that's salivary gland activity. She has excess tear fluid, so that's lacrimal gland activity. And she has diarrhea, which is the mucal gland activity in the GI tract. What would you expect to see upon examination of Elise's pupils? In this case, with parasympathetic nervous system activation, the pupils will be constricted. Question 30. What would you expect to find upon examination of Elise's pulse rate? The parasympathetic nervous system decreases the heart rate as well as decreases the respiratory rate. So the pulse rate in Elise's case would be decreased. This is the end of our case studies for chapters 12 through 14.